Hello, my name is Chloe Bean, and this presentation is a brief historical overview of special education in the United States, as well as looking at two specific judicial cases that have really been influential in what special education looks like in the United States. This presentation is designed as sort of a professional development for special education teachers, inclusion teachers, and teachers that have an inclusion section within their classroom, just to sort of brief them on what the history of special ed looks like, is just as a short introduction to it. So we are going to cover the first IEP or individual education plan and sort of just a brief history of what special ed has looked like in the United States and its origins. Then we are going to examine the 1982 Rowley versus Board of Education Supreme Court case and how that has impacted special education. And then we are going to examine the more recent 2017 Supreme Court case of Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District and what that has done for special education. And then finally, we are going to wrap up with what this all means and what it looks like in your classroom. IEPs, or individual education programs, were first introduced into public school in 1975 as a result of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This act also introduced the idea of the least restrictive environment, meaning that children with disabilities need to be able to interact with their peers who are not disabled as much as possible and kept in the similar environment as much as possible. Prior to this act, children with disabilities were often not allowed into public school at all, as there was no legislation that stated that public schools had to accommodate for these disabilities. This act was the beginning of really special education in terms of IEPs and what that looked like in the United States. In 1982, Amy Rowley and her family went before the United States Supreme Court as they sued the Hendrick Hudson School District, the school district where Amy Rowley went to school. Rowley's family claimed that her school had violated the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which would later be renamed to the Individuals with Disability Acts, or the IDEA. This act requires that all schools provide a free and public education to all students regardless of their abilities. Rowley's family claimed that her school had violated this because when they had requested that a sign language interpreter be provided for their deaf daughter, the school had denied this request. The Supreme Court ultimately sided with Rowley and introduced the idea of de minimis, meaning the minimum. This means that the IDEA does not have to provide children with the best access of accommodations or services, but rather the minimum or something that will help them with their education. This Supreme Court case set a precedence for what special education looks like in the United States and really paved the way for IEPs to be followed with fidelity. While the idea of this case, the de minimis, is no longer considered best practices and is pretty outdated, it was revolutionary at the time. In 2017, Andrew F. and his family went to the United States Supreme Court as they sued the Douglas County School District. This Supreme Court case served as an update of sort to the Amy Rowley Supreme Court case from over 4 decades prior. Whereas Amy Rowley's case had resulted in de minimis, showing that students had to receive some sort of educational benefit from their accommodations and services on their IEP, the focus of Andrew F. shifted the focus to progress monitoring as collected through data and allowing the data to shape educational practices, services, and accommodations, as well as classroom instruction. Andrew V. versus the Douglas County School District Supreme Court case helped to modify the idea set forth by the Board of Education versus Rowley Supreme Court case to make more legislation more up to date and to ensure that best practices are being followed. All children have access to a free and public education in the least restrictive environment. While the idea of de minimis was once a groundbreaking idea, current best practices call for educators to use data to help shape interventions and curriculum. By staying up to date on legislative changes and judicial hearings, you can make sure that you are always following best practices in your classroom. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have learned something about the history of special education and IEPs in the United States, and more specifically, the impact of some pretty influential Supreme Court cases on education. I always find it helpful to understand the why behind something, and I find that understanding it helps me to do it better. So I hope this video has helped you understand some of the why behind special education and IEPs in the United States, and I hope that this can help you in your classroom.